following is unapologetically silly. You have been warned. 'Twas the week before Valentine's Day, or as I like to call it, Singles Awareness Day, a time when lonely souls are reminded of just how single they are. One particularly lonely soul was Tony, a gentleman at heart who feared he'd never meet his match. Unfortunately for him, there was a deadline, the Valentine's Day race. As the days until Valentine's grew fewer and his discouragement grew deeper, Tony coped the only way he knew how. He went for a jog. As he ran, he tried to ignore the other couples running along so blissfully. He kept his head down figuratively, minding his own business, taking it all in stride until she appeared. The most beautiful creature on 5 toes. It was love at first sight. The moment he saw her, he fell for her.
Ouch!
Are you okay? She hopped over and kindly helped him up. Tony was embarrassed to have tripped over his own foot. This was not the time to make a lame first impression. He tried to think of something clever or funny, but was stumped.
Yeah, I'm Tony.
Nice to meet you. I'm Eileen Wright. Her smile made him weak at the knee. So, you like running? She gestured to the treadmills. He couldn't let this one get away.
Sure do.
Not all unileggers like running. I'm always trying to keep up with the two-leggers. I was training for a full marathon, then my friends convinced me to only do a half because, half leg and all that. Between you and me, it's a bit of a letdown.
I hear ya. My running buddies and I have been training for a 3-legged race, but I'm the odd one out.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
I asked the race director if it had to be 3 legs, and they said they could make an exception since I'm an amputee, so long as I have a partner.
That sounds fun. When is that?
On Valentine's Day at Westside Park.
I've got to run. I've got work in 5 minutes. I just forgot my water bottle, but why don't you text me the details?
Sure. I don't have my phone on me, no pockets, but let me write down my number.
Having no paper, he pulled off his name tag, added his number, Tony's left-handed, and gave it to Eileen. Thanks. Maybe I'll see you around. I love working out here every morning. She smiled at him, grabbed her water bottle, and waved goodbye. That night, Tony couldn't sleep. His thoughts were too preoccupied with the prettiest prosthesis he'd ever seen. Looks, 10 out of 10. Personality, 10 out of 10. Legs, 1 out of 2. Practically perfect in every way. The next morning, Tony checked his phone. No text from Eileen. He'd been disappointed but not surprised when she hadn't texted last night. She had said she was going to work after all, but he'd assumed she would have texted by now. Feeling uneasy, Tony decided to head to the gym early, to be sure he didn't miss her. He was just starting to get nervous when, through the windows, he saw her in the parking lot. His heart skipped a beat. A smile came to his socket, when suddenly, she slipped and fell on the icy ground. Tony leaped off the treadmill to go to her aid, but when he reached the door, he saw that someone else had beat him to it.
Mind if I lend a hand?
Yes, it was Palmer, Tony's underhanded nemesis from high school. Ouch! I hit my pylon.
Were you going to the gym?
She nodded.
You can't work out. You're hurt and need your rest. I'm taking you to lunch.
Tony watched in dismay as Palmer led Eileen away. He had to hand it to Palmer. He'd done what Tony didn't know how to do. In a matter of seconds, he'd swept Eileen off her foot. Tony had wanted to help when she'd gotten hurt, but he'd been too slow. The story of his life. Now Palmer had a real leg up. Tony dejectedly limped home. The next day, Eileen didn't go to the gym, or the next day, or the next. Tony saw her and Palmer when he was driving home. Tony sighed. He'd never stood a chance. On Friday, Tony was plodding along on the treadmill. He hardly knew why. He had no hope of seeing Eileen, and there was no point training for the 3-legged race without a partner. Habit dragged him to the gym, and a desire to drown his woes in endorphins kept him going. Hey, Tony. He looked up.
Eileen, hi, how are you doing?
She shrugged. Do you ever have days where you wonder why you even bother going to the gym?
Only every day.
She chuckled.
I mean, I could be sleeping in or watching TV, but instead I'm forcing myself to go the extra mile. I must be crazy or something.
You and me both. Then her smile faded. Especially me. I really thought I could do that full marathon, but now, she sighed.
Don't feel limited by the number of shoes you wear. It's what's on the inside that counts. Listen to yourself, not your doubters.
If you really think so. Tony nodded.
Eileen, if anyone can go double the distance on half the legs, I bet it's you.
She looked so grateful as he looked into her eyelets. He was tempted to ask for her number, or at least ask why she'd never called him, but stopped himself. If she'd chosen Palmer over him, he needed to respect her decision. It was the gentlemanly thing to do. Valentine's Day dawned cold and dark. Tony was tempted to forget all about the three-legged race. It'd be so easy to roll over and go back to sleep, but he had friends in that race. He should at least show up to support them. Tony arrived 10 minutes before the race. He stood to the side while his friends lined up. Then he heard a familiar voice. Tony! He turned and smiled when he saw Eileen, until he noticed Palmer. I was starting to think you weren't coming.
You were waiting for me?
Of course. I thought you needed a partner.
I told you to drop it. You shouldn't be running races, not with your condition.
What's that supposed to mean?
Look at you! You're on your last leg!
I think Eileen knows her abilities better than anyone else.
Palmer rolled his eyes and put a hand possessively on Eileen.
Come on, we're leaving.
But Eileen had had enough. Get your hand off me!
I beg your pardon?
You should! You're so heavy-handed, telling me what I can and can't do. I'm sick of your offhanded remarks about leg amputees. You're so lactose intolerant. Palmer's mouth fell open. He had been defeated. Come on, Tony, we have a race to run. Tony could hardly believe it as they hurriedly registered, hopped in line, and tied the knot.
On your mark, get set, go!
As they ran side by side, Tony couldn't stop thinking how much he liked Eileen. Which is your subtle cue to hit the like button and put your favorite amputee pun in the comments. They were toe and toe with the lead runners. As they neared the finish line, they put on a final burst of speed. Then Eileen's shoelace came untied. A moment later, they tumbled to the ground as the other runners blitzed past them. They didn't win, but they didn't care. Tangled up in the snow, they couldn't stop laughing. Then Tony noticed something.
My phone number!
It was on the bottom of her shoe. So that's where it went. I've been looking everywhere for that.
Really?
Of course. It's not every day a leg like me meets a limb like you. In fact, I was going to ask if maybe you'd want to run that full marathon with me. We could train together, unless you don't want to. I'd totally understand if...
You bet I would!
Tony grinned from bolt to bolt. Really? Awesome. When should we start?
There's no time like the present.
The happy pair ran off into the dawning of a new day. Tony had finally met his match, his one and only soulmate, Miss Wright.
Some really optimistic feet. Good gravy. They literally are running a race and then it's like, there's no time like the present. I think Eileen knows her abilities better than anyone else. That's probably not gonna make the cut, but bloopers. You were waiting for me. Roll on.
It's meant to be cheesy.
Look at you! You're on your last leg!